I wanted to take the opportunity of this first session of the series to introduce you to some things and to give you an expectation of what we're going to try to do, inshallah, in at least the first 20 days of Ramadan, maybe even more. And there are many people watching online as well, so I just wanted to give you a heads up of how and my intentions for this series. I want you to think of this, and I requested to do this series after the Taraweeh and do it late, even though I got late today, but inshallah I won't be again. The reason I wanted to do that is because I wanted to take my time covering the material. And I know it's inconvenient, it's late at night, and children aren't going to easily be able to attend on school nights, and there are other things going on. But I felt that one of the elements that are almost missing all the time in Ramadan is education. And this is a month for us to get a deeper understanding of the Quran. That's one part of what Ramadan is supposed to accomplish for us. It's almost as if every time Ramadan comes, we should be getting another semester of Quran education that adds on to our previous knowledge of the Quran, and we significantly make progress in our understanding and our appreciation of the Quran so we can contemplate it better, right? So I think of this as actually our Ramadan intensive education in the Quran. And which is why I need to take time to build a concept in you. Like we're so used to now getting sort of drizzle reminders, like here's a brief reminder and something beneficial, then something else that's beneficial, then something else that's beneficial. And all of those things individually are beneficial, but they're not building up to some larger framework. They're not part of a grand curriculum, right? So, and individually they all may be of benefit, and that's the difference between giving a reminder and teaching a course. So what I want you to first think about is, those of you that are inshallah going to be committing to this, it's almost like we're taking a course. And the course, the tying element of this course is something I started last year. So those of you that are interested and didn't know about that can actually go back and catch up also. But even if you didn't do the previous work, you can still continue with me from here. And that is that the Quran has different elements in the way that it communicates. Stories is one element in the Quran, right? And the stories are actually developing in a certain way. And so even though you can study, somebody says, I'm studying Surah Al-Baqarah, and that's one way to study the Quran, surah by surah by surah, right? Ayah by ayah by ayah. You can also study the Quran story by story by story. And if you do that, you'll learn something different than when you studied it surah by surah. Each one of them coming with their own kind of benefit, right? Then another element in the Quran, for example, is oaths, when Allah takes an oath. So you can study the Quran oath by oath by oath and get a picture of how Allah is using this device when He swears by time, or He swears by the mountain, or He swears by the skyline, or as the sky is turning orange, or He swears by the fig or the olive, etc. If you study those individually, that's one thing. If you look at the whole thing together, that element together, then you start seeing, oh, this is the system Allah has put together with the oaths. Something emerges. And one of those elements, one of the most powerful elements of the Qur'an's way of teaching is actually examples, parables. And this is something that Allah employs multiple times in the Qur'an, sometimes very directly and sometimes more indirectly. And I decided to start this last year to kind of go through all of the direct parables in the Quran. Every time Allah gives an example, let's take time to try to understand, why is Allah giving this example? What can we learn from it? How is Allah using this as an educational tool for us, for our guidance, right? And we went through about almost half the examples of the Quran last year when I was conducting this series in Manchester in the UK. And we left the series halfway. And there were alhamdulillah, lots of different audiences were in the program, many were watching online. And one of the most consistent feedbacks was actually from students that have been studying tafsir, studying Quran, that found that to be uniquely beneficial because they didn't see it from that angle before, right? So it really enhanced even, many of you don't have that background, but even the students and imams, etc., who had that background really benefited from seeing the parables kind of construct one on top of the other on top of the other. And I don't want to give this talk mostly about that, but I did want to help you understand the framework. And the framework is something like this. You guys know what a collage is? It's these small pictures. If you look at a picture, it's kind of an individual image. But if you step back, all those pictures kind of make a larger picture. That's kind of what's happening in the parables in the Quran. Each one of them is a piece of an image. And as you step back, it's actually a pretty large portrait where everything's sort of connected to everything else. And you start seeing how Allah is actually keeping us within the same frame, the same larger frame when He does that. Now, interestingly, the first example in the Quran, I don't know how this happened, but the first example in the Quran last year we skipped. And it was cool that we skipped it because it gives me an opportunity to start at the top with you, with example number 1 in the Quran, in a sense, or one of the first examples, not the first, but one of the first examples, because it's actually a really great orientation into what we're going to be doing over the next 19 or so days at least, inshallah. And that is the example that I just recited to you in the beginning. It's the example to explain examples. The Quran, because it's going to use examples all the time. And by the time Allah mentions this one, He already gave a couple of examples. But then Himself, Allah described, through the example we're going to study, how are you supposed to think about examples themselves? SubhanAllah, right? So, and me as a teacher, I've been in the teaching background for a long time. I know that teachers have different tools in their pocket. And the objective of a teacher is to make sure the student understands what I'm trying to say. That's my goal. I have 30 minutes, 40 minutes, whatever time I have, my goal is to get to the point where the student walks away with what? With understanding. My goal is not that the student is impressed with me. That would not be an educator's goal. My goal is also not that the student feels good, or the student, has, there could be different goals. And somebody could go up there and, I could speak for 30 minutes and you could leave with like a takbir. I'm excited. That was my goal, was to excite you. I could accomplish that goal. I could try to, everything I say, everything I orchestrate, it was towards that end. I needed to excite you. Or I wanted to make sure you cry. I set that as my objective. So now I'm going to throw things at you that, until I see somebody going, my goal isn't accomplished. Or my goal was to get you to spend money and give a donation, right? And then I'm going to construct my narrative to get you to that goal. But as a teacher, what's a teacher's goal? The teacher has a lesson in their head. And a good teacher, their job is not just, let me just read from the book and let's go home. A good teacher's job is to make eye contact with the students, to which one looks confused, which one is zoned out. I need their attention here. I need them to focus. I need them to be able to keep up with what I'm saying. And maybe they were keeping up with step 1, step 2, step 3, and at step 4, the faces started changing. So what do I have to do as a teacher? Hold on a second. Let me give you an example. Let me tell you a story. Let me take a pause. Let me make a joke. Teachers do these things to breathe oxygen back into the room. Because sometimes when teachers speak, they don't release sound, they release sleeping gas from their mouth, right? So some of the best sleep you've had in your life has been in a classroom, and you know that, right? So a teacher's job then becomes a teacher cannot accomplish their objective if they don't keep your attention. And they also cannot accomplish their objective if they don't come to your level. So a couple of fundamental things before I get into this example, just from a teaching perspective, is that let's just say there are two people that have a PhD in quantum physics, both of them, super high level quantum physics guys, right? And they're both sitting at a table together. They're discussing quantum physics with each other. And I barely know how to spell quantum, don't ask me to spell physics. I walk into the room, I'm sitting on the same table. They're having that conversation. Am I understanding their conversation? No, because they're both at a certain level and they don't have to dumb it down to talk to each other. You understand? So they're talking to each other at a level, I have no idea what's going on over here. Because they're speaking at a different frequency altogether. Physics, quantum physics talked about multiple dimensions. They are in a different dimension from myself. Okay, they're in a higher plane of existence. But each one of them, they didn't start out that way. There was a time when they were in 3rd grade and they barely knew their pencil from their pen, right? There was someone in their educational path who didn't speak to them that way. the teacher came and met them at their level. If they're at level 100, the teacher came down and spoke to them at level 1, and the teacher almost pretended that the teacher is also at level 1. The teacher is also at level 1. I've made reference to this before, and this is going to be a really important piece of today's discussion. So I'm mentioning it for an agenda. One of the most amazing experiences of my life as a teacher was to actually get an education in kindergarten education. I used to give khutbah at Adelphi University in New York, and part of the gig was they made me the chaplain of the university. I was 20 years old, and when they made me the chaplain of the university, it came with certain perks, and one of the perks was you can take any course at the university for free. So I decided to take the master's degree courses in kindergarten education, right? Because my theory was, if you can get through to a kindergartner, you can get through to any species on the planet. Right? So, and if you can get through to 20 kindergartners at the same time, I don't know what magic they do in the classroom, but if they can pull that off, that's something powerful. So I go into this room, in this class. I'm in my early 20s at best, and everybody else in the room has a master's degree in education. They're already professional teachers. They teach during the day, and they're continuing their education at night. This is the scene. So I sit in first day of class. I still remember. Our professor was an older lady, must have been in her 60s. For the sisters in their 60s, mashallah, you're young, it's okay. Okay, so she comes into the classroom, and she has a storybook in her hand, The Lion and the Mouse. The Lion and the Mouse. And she just kind of tosses the book, and she gets on the chair, and then she gets on the table. And she says, once upon a time, there was a lion. And there was a tiny little mouse. Beep, beep. And she's doing this stuff, and I was like, am I in the right place? Is this abnormal psychology 101, or is this kindergarten education? And she does this entire thing for 5 minutes, and we're laughing, we're weirded out, but you know what? She owned the classroom. The moment she walked in, you will not pay attention to anything else. And then when she was done with that entire theatrics, she said, when you walk into the classroom, you need to understand your objective, the attention of your students. Where do you want to get them to be? You need to engage them in your conversation. You're not just there to get something off your chest. You're not just there for that. You're there to capture those that are in your audience, right? And one of the most powerful tools that the Quran uses to do that is to give examples that can actually reach you. Like I told you, 2 PhDs are talking, they're talking at a certain level. Allah did not reveal the Quran to impress the PhD or the academic or the politician. You know, politicians have their own way of talking, right? They have their own way of talking. The PhDs have their own way of talking. The poets have their own way of talking. The literaries have their own way of talking. The English professor has their own way of talking. Anybody who has a higher level of knowledge, they speak in a certain way. Most of us are not able to connect with the way that they speak. There are some people that are so scholarly, they have so much knowledge. And I'm not going to name names, even in the Muslim Ummah, even in the English-speaking education scene, there are people that are so incredibly intellectual that every time I spend time with them, 2-3 minutes at best, I feel like a village idiot. That's even when they're ordering food at a restaurant. The sophistication in their language makes me feel like I don't belong in the same space. I think I need to be a taxi driver or something else, because this is way too high above. But those same people that are so smart, what do you think? Do a lot of people listen to what they have to say? No. And why is that? Because most people are not able to connect with them at that level, because they speak at this frequency and most people are at this. Not that people are dumb, but people need you to speak to them in their language, right? وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِن رَسُولٍ إِلَّا بِلِسَانِ قَوْمِهِ. We didn't send any messenger except in the tongue of his people. That doesn't just mean that the Arabs get an Arab prophet and the Jews get a Jewish prophet, or the Africans get an African prophet. It's not like that. Lisan doesn't just mean language. It's not lugha. It's actually culture also. They understand the cultural expressions. They understand what's relatable to that community, what phrases to use, what vocabulary to use, right? So that's the background against which I want you to understand why is Allah giving examples anyway? Because Allah's objective is not to impress. Allah's objective is not to leave someone, confounded. Allah's objective is to educate. Allama al-Quran. He taught the Quran. He educated us with the Quran. That's what He literally says, right? وَيُعَلِّمُكُمُ اللَّهُ. Allah says, Allah is teaching you. Allah is teaching you. So yes, part of the Quran is warning, part of the Quran is encouragement, part of the Quran is, giving good news and making you feel good. There are different objectives, but one of its objectives, especially when it comes to examples, is actually to educate you, to make you think about something. Now, last think about this introduction. What's the most important thing about giving an example for a teacher? Well, the teacher is going to give an example because the things you're discussing, let's say you're discussing something in philosophy. Philosophy can get very pie in the sky. It can get very complicated to understand. So if the teacher wants to explain something philosophical, he says, let's say this flower pot. Let's say the orange one and the yellow one and the red one, etc. They start using the elements they're not talking about the pot, are they? They're talking about what? Philosophy. But to get someone to understand what they're saying, they're going to point at this, this, and this. You understand? And the guy across says, man, I'm trying to discuss philosophy, you're discussing flower pots. Look at this flower pot guy. Right? Hey guys, look at this guy. He thinks he knows philosophy, he wants to talk about pots and colors. You know what the other guy's doing? The other person who's listening, instead of giving the person an opportunity to explain through the example, they're dismissing the example, aren't they? They didn't even allow the person to make their point, because this was leading to something. The thing with an example is, you gotta wait. You gotta let the picture be painted. You've gotta sit with it. And then you can have the aha moment. You're not gonna have the aha moment the moment you hear it, because the moment you hear it is just a pot. But if you let the teacher sit with it and say, you know what, I'm gonna let you finish your example. And if it's a skilled teacher, pretty soon you're gonna get to a point where you're like, oh my God, that was incredible. How'd you think of that? That was genius. But if somebody else is walking by quickly and they overheard that conversation, are they going to hear the genius of the strategy of using the flowers in the pot, or they're just going to hear some idiot talking about a flower pot? In other words, examples require concentration. Examples require you to give yourself a little bit and say, you know what, this is going somewhere, but I'm going to humble myself. This has a purpose. I don't see it right away. I'm not going to question it at first. I'm going to just suspend judgment and surrender my attention and allow the conclusion to emerge before I make a judgment on whether or not this is a relevant lesson or not, whether this is meaningful or not. You understand? But very quickly, very easily, there are some people that have a certain kind of personality. They like to dismiss what's being said, and they're impulsive about their judgments. Those kinds of people don't have the patience to actually be like, why should I be humbled and be given an example? What am I going to learn from a flower pot? And they'll just dismiss it immediately. Now let's begin this ayah. Inna Allah la yastahi. Certainly Allah is not ashamed. It is not Allah who's ashamed. An yadriba mathalan, to give an example. What a way to begin. Allah is not ashamed. It's not Allah who's ashamed to give an example. Why would Allah even say that? Right? Just think about what Allah is saying. When is someone ashamed to speak? Someone is ashamed to speak when they think other people are going to judge what they're saying. They're going to judge their intelligence from what comes out of their mouth. They're going to judge their social standing. They're going to judge their validity. They're going to judge their authenticity, etc., etc. So if you are so concerned with the judgments of others, you will be ashamed before you open your mouth. And you'll say, maybe I shouldn't say that. How many people here have sat in a classroom and they had a question from the teacher and they're like, I don't think I'm going to ask, because if I ask, all the other students or the teacher is going to think, how stupid are you? So you're not going to raise your hand. You're not going to say it. You understand? Or you were about to make your point, the professor said something and you wanted to respond, but you felt ashamed because if I say this, it doesn't sound as smart as how my professor said it. So I'm gonna appear stupid and unsophisticated, so I need to step back. You understand? Allah says, Allah is not looking to impress you. Allah is educating you. Allah does not have to use high language that only some intellectuals will understand, because if He uses common language, everyday people language, that somehow it's not sophisticated enough, and therefore it will be mocked and it will be looked down upon. No. It isn't Allah who's ashamed. You're ashamed. It's actually al-ithbat ala ghayr al-fa'il. Inna Allah la yastahi, because of the arrangement of the words. What that means is, you're the one who's ashamed to give simple examples, because then people will think you're a simpleton. People will think you're too unsophisticated because you talk that way. I could sit here, for example, in these last 20 minutes that I've been talking to you, I could sit here and start reading from Ibn Ashur or Alusi, Tafsir al-Razi, or I'll read Zamakhshari, Kashaf, or read al-Qurtubi, and read lots of Arabic words and discuss the grammar of this ayah and this and that and the other. And you know what will happen when I do that? Of course, I will be releasing sleeping gas. But you know what? Some of you might say, MashaAllah, so much Arabic, so many words and so many quotes. Oh, ha, 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 ha. You might walk away with, oh, ha, 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 ha. But you're not walking away with an education. You're not walking away with an education. If my objective is to educate you, I don't care what your impression of me is. The teacher who moved me so much, did she care what people will think when she climbed up on the desk? Because her ultimate objective is what? Education. And if some of her PhD friends that are also professors at the university were walking by the class and they just looked inside the class and they saw this crazy old lady, she's like, she gives professors a bad name. Such a ridiculous thing to do. So beneath us, because the intellectuals are at a certain ivory tower, right? You gotta present yourself a certain way. You're the sheikh, you're the alim, you're the this, you're the that. And by the way, all of this fits like a glove in what I'm trying to share with you, because this surah, this example, and this discussion belongs to Surah Al-Baqarah. In the early period of Surah Al-Baqarah, when the Rasul ﷺ moved to Medina, and now we were directly engaged with the rabbis. I'll say that again. We were directly engaged with the rabbis. And the rabbis were the scholars. They were the scholars. And the scholars, in order to be impressed, they need to be spoken to at their level. You understand? But the Quran has been speaking to the level of the Arabs. And the Arabs of Makkah, 2/3 of the Quran has been revealed. Are the Arabs of Makkah like university graduate ulama? Are they no. They are. Their biggest, deepest thoughts come from their discussions about the ash from the fire and the camel and the bird they see flying over them. And they give examples all the time. The Arabs of Makkah and Hijaz, they give examples of all the time. But if you look at the Bible, especially the Old Testament, the Jewish literature, the Jewish scripture, there's barely any examples. There's barely any examples. The parables in the biblical literature are New Testament, Jesus onwards, most of the time. So examples are like they almost see it as unsophisticated. Right? So now the Quran is coming and it's giving examples. And who can appreciate the examples? The Arabs at large. And who's going to be a little bit unimpressed with this? Like, examples. Who do you think? He thinks he's talking to children? Who's going to think like that? The rabbis. And Surah Al-Baqarah is directly addressing them too. And from the very beginning, Allah says, I'm not here to impress you. I'm not giving these words to impress you. I'm giving these words to educate. Inna Allah la yastahi an yadriba mathala, to strike any example. Allah does not feel any hesitation. We're going to sit with this example for a bit. Just this phrase. It's a powerful expression of confidence. When I speak about my religion, I've been put in this situation before. Some of you, imams, khatibs, others know this position also. You've been invited to give a khutbah somewhere, and then they tell you, by the way, the governor's going to be in the masjid. They're going to be sitting in the back. Oh, there's a bunch of professors from the local university. They're visiting, and they're sitting in the back. Right before you go up for the minbar, one of the board members, by the way, there's the chief of police. And the dean of Oxford, or the head of Harvard is actually here. Okay, all right. Use big words. As if now that I know someone of a higher class is there, what should happen to my speech? I shouldn't be talking to the taxi driver. I shouldn't be talking to the high school kid. I shouldn't be talking to the guy that's working all day at the factory. I shouldn't be talking to the mom who's taking care of her baby. I shouldn't be talking to the engineer or the accountant. No, I need to talk in a way that who's impressed? The governor, the professor, the whoever, right? Allah says, you people feel shame when you speak about this deen. He doesn't. What's He teaching us? Speak about your deen with confidence, and you don't need to change what Allah says in order to reach a certain kind of people, to meet their standard, because the highest standard is that of Allah. وَكَلِمَةُ اللَّهِ هِيَ الْعُلْيَا. It's the highest form of speech. And in that highest form of speech, you come to the level of the people. إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَسْتَحِي أَنْ يَضْرِبَ مَثَلًا مَا بَعُوضَةً فَمَا فَوْقَهَا. I won't finish the parable today. I want to give you a taste today, but we'll just do one little piece of this, the next piece. He says, ba'uda, a mosquito. Even a mosquito. By the way, مثلا ما, the ma is tanawwur. What that means is, Allah does not have any hesitation, any shame whatsoever, you do, in giving any example whatsoever. Allah is not going to say, no, this example won't impress, or this example may not be appropriate. No. Allah has no restrictions on what He might use to get the point across to you. مثلا ما. And then he gives an example of what kind of example might He give. He says, ba'udatan, a mosquito. You know what's really cool? In the entire Quran, there are no examples of a mosquito. There's an example of a fly. We're going to do that soon. There's an example of a spider. And early on He prepared us. He doesn't even hesitate to give an example of a what? Mosquito. And I'm looking for, okay, so there's going to be a mosquito example. There's no mosquito example. And as we say in Punjabi, fir kya kyun si? Why'd you say it then? Right? Well, why give an example of I'm not going to hesitate to even give an example of a mosquito. By the way, I'm not going to give an example of a mosquito. Why would He do that? SubhanAllah. You know why? Because the mosquito is the example to teach us about examples. It is the example. It's your first example. Because you're like, mosquito? The thing about mosquitoes is you can shoo them away real quick. They're not like flies. Flies have very quick reaction time. They have cameras on the backup cameras too, right? They have multiple eyes, backup cameras. So as you're coming for the fly, unless you know Kung Fu, or you can do the chopstick thing from Karate Kid, those of you that are old know what I'm talking about, Mr. Miyagi's skills, you're not going to catch a fly. But a mosquito is about to sit on your arm, and what can you do? It's sitting on the table, and the mosquito is just too slow to react. Right? And it's a tiny, annoying little nuisance, the mosquito. And even if it gets you with a little annoyance, and then it itches and has a little bump and whatever, right? What am I going to learn from a mosquito? Except, about 700,000 people a year die from mosquitoes. It's the number one killer on the planet. Zika, malaria, dengue. 700,000 people, even now, die of these diseases directly caused by mosquitoes. At first glance, it's just a little thing. Then you step back and you realize. And by the way, from a biological perspective, scientists argue they're about 100 million years old. They've been around way longer on this planet than you and I. They're much better at killing us than we are at killing them. Much better. At first glance, you underestimate it. Then you start thinking about it. And the world probably didn't even know this about mosquitoes. But also, mosquitoes, you might know, we know that, bees pollinate plants. But actually, mosquitoes are a crucial part of pollinating plants and fruits and crop around the world. Mosquitoes aren't just a nuisance, they're actually an essential part of the ecosystem. If some people hate bugs. Ya Allah, why can't you just kill all the bugs? Well, if you did, the larvae of the mosquito actually feed a huge amount of fish, and a huge amount of plant life survives off of the larvae and the remains of mosquitoes. So much of the food that we eat, in order to become that food, consumed something that came from the corpse of a mosquito. Allah is teaching us everything. He's using something so insignificant, but when you step back, you realize it's so incredibly profound. It's not something small at all. Ba'udah. And then, again, the idea was, Allah was talking to Banu Israel, right? And we'll see a little bit later on, Allah will say the people who reject the examples are the fasiqeen, who cut what Allah has commanded to keep together. يَقْطَعُونَ مَا أَمَرَ اللَّهُ بِهِ أَنْ يُوصَلَ. This is the definition of the fasiqeen, and later, maybe tomorrow I'll show you. The fasiqeen are the people who reject these examples, who don't get guidance from them, right? And just one piece of that. What do the fasiqeen do? They cut the relationships that Allah has commanded to keep together. Allah has commanded that the blood should remain inside my skin. It doesn't flow on the outside, it flows on the inside. Yes? And what does a mosquito come and do? It violates my skin. And it takes something that is meant to be inside and it pulls it out. And then it puts something into it, puts its saliva inside, it puts its protein inside. And you know what it puts inside? It's not putting it inside in order to poison you. That's not its intention. You know what the saliva that it puts inside you, scientists tell us that it puts it inside you so that the sucking of the blood is easier. So the only thing it gives you is what makes taking easier. Sounds like some of your relatives? There are people who Allah describes later on, corrupt people who cut family ties. And the kinds of people usually that cut family ties are highly selfish people. And even when they give you something, they're only giving you so that taking from you becomes easier. And they most of the time, even what they end up giving you is poisonous. 700,000 people dying from what the gift of the mosquito inside the skin. It's pretty remarkable that Allah described the fasiqeen a little bit in the people who reject Allah's examples. And before, He just made just a light reference to the mosquito who just loves to take. It just loves to take. By the way, mosquitoes can smell, they can tell that there's someone to bite from about 75 feet away, 23 meters away. They can sense carbon dioxide coming out of our mouth and our nose and come, oh, there's a human here. It's not even your, it's an amazing creature. You first look at the mosquito and say, well, yeah, you're right. Allah is giving some far-fetched, weird example. Allah says, I can give any, example that might even seem irrelevant. And then all you have to do is stop and think. And all of a sudden, the thing that was irrelevant became profound. If Allah was giving examples of a war where 1,000 people died, or 5,000 or 10,000, you'd be like, whoa, that was a heavy example. And you have a little mosquito that's killing 750,000 people every year. And you're like, mosquito? Give me something serious. Give me something heavier. It's as if human beings don't realize the power of the smallest things Allah mentions. What's the tendency? So I'll leave you with this. What's the tendency? The tendency of a human being is to look at that, look at an example, and just like the flower pot, what's the first impulse for some people? What are you talking about? And you know the scariest part of that I want to leave you with is, okay, the kuffar do that. They dismiss the examples in the Quran. But do Muslims? We have a relationship with the Quran. We're going to listen to its recitation. The hufaz around the country, especially around the holiest city in America, Dallas al-Munawwara, right? This is a time right now where it's the spiritual Olympics for the hufaz, because they're about to lead Taraweeh, and all day they're going to be like, oh, the mutashabihat are killing me, and they're doing their reviews, and we're obviously celebrating the Quran, we're reciting the Quran, we're listening to the Quran, we're loving the Quran, we're improving our tajweed of the Quran, we're memorizing, we're doing all that stuff, but our relationship with the Quran is more about its form, right? The sounds of it, the memorization of it. But when it comes to its content, we talk about how Allah's words are guidance. We say that. We give it that lip service. Actually, I've noticed we talk more about the Quran than talking the Quran itself. It's like telling someone, man, this car is amazing. Don't sit in it, but this car is amazing. It's so beautiful. Have you seen this car? It's the most amazing car. So have you driven? No, it's just so amazing though. You know what people say about this car? You know what historians said about this car? You know what this one said about this car? And you're talking about the car, about the car, about the car, about the car, and nobody's going for a test drive. And when you look inside the car a little bit, it looks a little complicated. I'll just hear how amazing this car is from the outside. I don't want to sit inside. And then I'm talking about Muslims, forget about non-Muslims. A Muslim will start reading the Quran in translation. And they come across this, Allah is not ashamed to give an example of a mosquito. What? I'm sure it means something. I don't know. It's kind of, what am I going to learn from a mosquito example? Ustad Nouman, what are you going to do this month? I'm going to talk about examples in the Quran. Oh, I wish it was something relevant. I wish you were talking about some real issues. Because what's the psychological sort of pre-programming? What am I going to learn from this? This is some alim thing. This is some abstract thing. This is not relevant to me. Isn't that the attitude of those who dismiss the examples Allah is giving? Isn't it? And what's the believer's attitude when they come across Allah giving an example? فَيَعْلَمُونَ أَنَّهُ الْحَقُّ مِنْ رَبِّهِمْ. They know that it's real, it's purposeful, it's the truth. Like there's nothing more real than this. Al-Haq is a very powerful word to describe the example. The believer knows, even if they haven't understood the example yet, they already know it has real purpose. And that purpose came directly from their Rabb. أَنَّهُ الْحَقُّ مِنْ رَبِّهِمْ. Whoa. What an attitude shift towards the examples in the Quran. And what a scary thing for Allah to say, as if Allah is saying, those who really believe in me, don't underestimate my examples. A litmus test for Iman in this ayah, a litmus test of Iman and humility is how humble am I to the examples. Actually. Remember I was giving you this silly example and the person sitting across from me did not want to humble their judgment, suspend it, and just sit with it for a little bit. That's flowers. What am I going to learn about flowers? And they don't want to listen to it. We need to learn to suspend judgment and give ourselves to the example and humble ourselves, because that, we talk about humility to Allah. Now Allah is giving us a practical. Humility to Allah will begin by humility to the word of Allah. Humility to the word of, I'm here to learn. I'm going to give myself to this and allow Allah to teach me. And I don't know, but there is purpose. Before I even learn it, I know it's purposeful because it's coming from Allah. That attitude, not the dismissive attitude, not the attitude where I want to hear what I want to hear about, because we're now in the new age of. We're not even in the age of Google, right? Google's in the past now. We're in the age of AI, and what AI is going to do is something very profound. People talk about the good side of AI. I'm going to tell you something about the dark side of AI. Pretty soon, AI will relieve you of the burden of having to think about anything. Just tell me what the best restaurant is. Just tell me what the best book is. Just tell me. Do the thinking for me. I don't have time to think. Do the thinking for me. And it's going to start with the groceries and the gas and the, what's the best, company to, or what best car, or best place for this or that or the other, or business decisions or marketing decisions, and people are optimizing their businesses using this thing. But pretty soon it's going to be, people are already reaching out to me. Yeah, we're getting AI to do tadabbur of the Quran for us. It's great, yeah, because that's too much heavy lifting. Allah gave us this thing. Now we can outsource these brain cells to. We could do that, right? But when that happens, then what is dictating the AI? Whatever you want, you get to place the demands. You are in charge. Knowledge, you're not seeking the knowledge, you're not serving the wisdom or coming for the wisdom. The wisdom is coming to you. It's coming to you. So now when the Quran gives an example, or Quran talks about Surah Al-Baqarah, that's really long. Can we do something shorter? Because I need to cater guidance to me instead of catering myself to the guidance. But we're now living in a time where what's in the air? Everything needs to be catered to me. I'm the Rabb. Ana Rabbukumul A'la. We're entering the phase, the phase in humanity where everybody gets to become a mini Fir'aun. In their own little world, they have their own pyramid, and they have their own Ana Rabbukum al-A'la, and they have their slave doing their bidding. Serve me, feed me, entertain me. Me. Right? And in the midst of all of that, Allah is pulling us in a completely opposite direction. No, humble yourself, serve Allah. Humble yourself and serve Allah. Man, we have a battle ahead of us, an internal mental battle ahead of us. So there's so much to discuss about this parable. We won't do that today because I don't want to take too much time. But inshallah ta'ala, we're going to take our time going through these parables little by little. Some of the introductory elements I've covered. The others inshallah ta'ala will continue tomorrow. Barakallahu li wa lakum fil Qur'an al-Hakim wa nafa'ani wa iyyakum bil ayati wa dhikr al-Hakim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.